I've often praised fall as an important time of the year for the anime life cycle. Fall 2025 marks a drastic shift from that notion with a lack of high-profile adaptations, in addition to very likely going down in anime history as one of the worst seasons ever. Nevertheless, I'm here to give the undeniably best takes on what the best and worst anime of fall 2025 were. At the end, I'll crown one anime as the best of the season and another one as the worst of the worst. Let me know in the comments what you thought was the best and worst anime of fall. Now let's get into the tier list. To start off the list, if I judge the wild last boss appeared by the first half, it'd be A tier. At first, it seemed like a cool yet different interpretation of Overlord. Luffy has to set out to find previous allies and struggle with losing the sense of self to the game character Luffy. Instead of Overlord's Ainz already having his allies before setting off into the world and needing to become more like what the game character Ainz represents. In the second half, anime flipped into this whole other scenario with the introduction of the Demon King by essentially borrowing the main plot of Tsukimichi Moonlit Fantasy. It made me lose faith in the ability for it to be creative through a metaphorical ceiling on the show. It's not exactly a problem for entertainment to take inspiration from others. It's a problem when it's not on par or better than what it's taking from. At this point, a wild last boss appeared as B tier, and from here it's downhill with any new seasons. You know what? I'll admit it. I was wrong about One Punch Man Season 3. I defended the previous season and said sure, the animation was significantly worse, but Saitama carried the anime too hard, and the second season was given the impossible task of living up to the finale of Boros vs. Saitama. Now, after giving JC's staff the benefit of the doubt, this season was a miserable grind that was overly reliant on dramatic cinematic shots to fill up airtime. It's important to take into account that One Punch Man wasn't just one season of lousy animation. Totally Not Mark made an excellent video going over the production woes and how the production higher-ups carry a lot of the blame. It felt like it shifted too much of the criticisms off of JC's staff. The failures of One Punch Man Season 3 are vast and put a spotlight on an industry that places high value on quantity instead of quality. Unfortunately for this anime, that doesn't change the fact you didn't want to watch it. D tier. The next anime to place on the tier list is Shabake. I honestly had higher hopes for it. The anime ended up being a slow burn mystery that's pacing was so slow you'd zone out. Main and supporting characters were boring. The only interesting historical depiction was people paying money to eat mummy flesh, and the mythological elements didn't really stand out from the humans. Shabake is something that's forgetful, and so it gets a D for disappearing. My perception of 2 Year Eternity was the tale of the eternal being Fushi's journey, the impact of the friends he's met along the way on him, and the sacrifices the knockers forced them to make over the centuries. With Season 2 introducing Fushi's ability to bring the dead back to life, this was the start to the story worsening, but I thought the finale saved it by wrapping up the anime in a satisfying way. I've tried to approach Season 3 with an open mind despite believing it wasn't needed, and it never ended up emotionally clicking for me. Self-sacrifice to save or benefit others is often held in high regard because you're gifting your life against your own self-interest so that other people can live on. A large part of what made this anime so good was the sadness of knowing Fushi's formed these connections and in the process become more human, just for the conflict with the knockers to take them away. Now Fushi's forcing his friends to deal with the continued suffering with him. Their gift of life to him is diminished in addition to their existence now being more a form of punishment than a blessing. I've also found that the Hayase bloodline's obsession with Fushi has run its course by constantly being a plot point each season. So instead of feeling interested, it's more like, wow, the same thing again, huh? 2 Year Eternity Season 3 has a portion airing in winter 2026 to change the negative outlook I have towards it. With what's been presented, I'll have to give it C for now. Are you a fan of anime where the odds are stacked against them and they succeed despite that? Underdogs that rise to the occasion through hard work and dedication? Hero without a class who even needs skills is that in name only. Errol doesn't really face any discrimination from being classless that he'd have to overcome. The whole class system is arbitrary since people can learn whatever skills they want with no restrictions but time and place. Oh, and if you thought maybe the obstacle to overcome would be learning abilities from classes, nope, not that either. His parents just happen to be two of the strongest characters in the world. Maybe you also thought based on the name of the anime that there'd be some antagonist for the hero to defeat and you'd be wrong again. The show has nothing. It's bland, boring, and doesn't take any chances to set itself apart not only from the fantasy of fall, but anime of the genre that have come before it. Hero without a class who even needs skills is D tier. My status as an assassin obviously exceeds the heroes, or how I see it. That time I was isekai'd as Jinwoo to Aura Farm with shadow magic and ended up with an elf baddie in the process. Outside of the animation, the anime ends up being run-of-the-mill and very tropey. When something tries to do too much, instead of honing in on one or two elements to progress from, it can't really provide an experience of substance. Don't get me wrong, I like the things the show tries. Having two perspectives, one from Akira's party and then the heroes, or Amelia and Akira falling for each other. However, these half-hearted attempts expect emotional buy-in to the idea without heavy lifting for the necessary viewer investment. The best thing my status as an assassin sets out to explore is the internalized conflict of Akira. I've often been critical of isekai for how easily they drop characters into a fantasy world and presume they'll just get over modern moral dilemmas without contention over them. The only issue here with that is other characters' reactions undermining it. Crow isn't as understanding as you might expect from his backstory, and Amelia is all talk and no action when it comes to involving herself like you'd assume from a partner. My status as an assassin obviously exceeds the heroes, has a lot of potential from the foundation it's set, and if it were to get a second season, I could see the anime getting better. As is usually the case with good animation, the viewer will often ignore inherent flaws, and that was the case here, so I can't place it higher than C. My Awkward Senpai started off strong by setting up a believable potential romance between Kanawa and Kamigawa, as well as the office space actually being used in the story. Unfortunately, it commits a mistake I detest seeing in adult cast rom-com, infantilizing the romance as a way of expressing the character's inexperience. Does this happen to a lesser extent in real life? Sure, but what's the point of watching adult characters act the same as you'd expect a character from something like Teasing Master Takagi-san, especially when an adult setting can offer a lot of interesting scenarios. My Awkward Senpai ends up being a D tier anime because it got scared of standing out. The only thing nice I have to say about my Gift Lvl 9999 unlimited gacha, backstabbed in a backwater dungeon, I'm out for revenge, is that the revenge premise seemed cool at first. Once the anime got underway, it was like seeing a train wreck. Light becomes overpowered off screen, gathers together a bunch of followers, afterwards time skipping, as is standard from garbage fantasy. Some of those said followers uncomfortably fawn over a teenage boy, in addition to us not knowing anything about them that get us to find them endearing. Stereotypical fantasy slop that started from a premise that if they were serious about, could have resulted in something better than we got. Level 9999 unlimited gacha was D tier. I'd like to be able to place the blame just on the animation changes for my disappointment in Kakuriyo Bed and Breakfast for Spirit Season 2. However, it's really more that the stories push to the wayside Aoi's strengths. It's been reiterated time and time again that she's not her grandfather, and her weapon against the Ayakashi is cooking. Yet there's very few moments in the season where Aoi's meals impact the life of someone in the same meaningful way as the first season. There's been a huge push to essentially shonenify the anime with action, overly force the master innkeeper and Aoi's relationship, and now characters are from the eternal realm as well. Kakuriyo feels so far removed from what made the first season enjoyable. Obviously, outside of the story, the animation is abysmal. Even if we're multiple years removed from the prequel, shows like Natsume's Book of Friends have shown it's easy to level up the visual quality while characters retain the same inherent feel. Completing the second season was miserable, especially when I think back to the previous one. Kakuriyo is going into D tier, and further seasons cannot convince me to return. Usually a long-winded fantasy title at least hints at the story about to unfold. That wouldn't be the case with the banished court magician aims to become the strongest. When Alec doesn't see progression towards his lifelong goal of changing class discrimination in the nation and faces the obstacle of being kicked from the crown prince's party, he kinda just gives up on it. Even when he's given a second chance at it, he declines. So in so much of the first episode sets up this expectation of changing a nation, the pivot makes you wonder what was the point. The rest of the anime airtime is spent on trying to convince you to care for this party. If the first episode was more about building a connection to them during their academy days, maybe I wouldn't feel so indifferent. The banished court magician aims to become the strongest is plain old D tier. If you've enjoyed anime like The Pet Girl of Sakura So or Remake Our Life, where the likes of romance and creative endeavors like video games created by a group are simultaneously explored, then My Friend's Little Sister Has It In For Me is something that pretends to be that. The negative points that destroy the possibilities for this show is forced relationships where characters pretend to like one another, which is already something I dislike. Then combining that with the clingy, over-sexualized Iroha, we end up with garbage. It tried to pretend there's more here by talking about the work on a game by the Fifth Floor Alliance, but we don't see any sort of actualization of that. We really just get a weird scene with the teacher that's a part of the Alliance. A little bit of cleavage had you anime gooners foaming at the mouth for the D. D tier anime, I mean. My Friend's Little Sister Has It In For Me. I said in my first impressions that the Dusk Beyond the End of the World had the potential to be a dark horse, and to my disappointment, that anime never lived up to that. Episode 0 showed glimpses of promise. With each following episode, the realization that this is a stereotypical post-apocalyptic show set in. The AI elements should have been the defining part of the anime, except it ended up being boring iterations of Toa. Dusk Beyond the End of the World is a reminder that a good premise can't succeed with a weak execution. D tier. The second season of Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill lost that spark for me that the first season had, and I think it boils down to a couple of reasons. Fenrir and Makoto's dynamic didn't feel the same, with them not riffing back and forth as much. There was so many less fun monster encounters that turned into unique meals outside of really just the finale, and that idea was a really big draw for the show. You also have to take into account this isn't the first gourmet isekai, and the big thing that set Campfire Cooking apart was the exploration and turning monsters to meals. Season 2 had so much downtime in Dolan City, and for an anime with Campfire Cooking in the name, we sure weren't camping a lot. I felt pretty disappointed with what we got due to the heights I know it can reach. Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill Season 2 is going into C. Spy Family started off as a really amazing anime that I fell in love with for its mix of seriousness, humor, and wholesomeness, as did much of the world. When the series began doing these arcs like the tennis and cruise ones, they're not terrible, however they don't generate the same level of appeal. The show is at its best when weaving between settings for added chaos, and Anya is at the forefront. Characters like Lloyd and Yor can be good in bite-sized arcs, but when they try to retain the same comedic field in those said arcs without Anya, that's when it starts to struggle. Season 3 refocused on the original objective of the plot and was a return to that feeling I had in the beginning and hoped for a return to. If you checked out on this anime, I suggest giving it another shot. Spy Family lands solidly in A tier and is the first one at that. I feel like I've watched more of Let This Grieving Soul Retire than it really deserves. There's no direction or even basic goal a character is trying to achieve for the audience to engage with. The anime has completely given up on remaining true to the title, and I'm not even sure what audience it's trying to entertain. With how hard it's leaned into harem/ecchi elements while trying to remain an adventure fantasy. I guess Cry is now fully a character that won't quit adventuring while being seen as a whimsical being that's unintentional actions cause havoc and everyone everyone thinks he's a genius because of it. There's no substance to let this grieving soul retire or meaningful narrative being conveyed here. I've seen it said that the anime is comedy, and yet it feels more like a form of suffering I was subjecting myself to. I guess that's where the comedy comes from, people laughing at people that watch this. I don't want to watch more, and anyone that finds Let This Grieving Soul Retire Cour 2 good has terrible taste. D tier. Chitose is in the Ramune bottle, is well animated and a decent enough anime, but that's not enough for it to deserve a high rating. It falls into the MC with a high IQ, butts into everyone's problems and fixes them archetype, with its defining trait being Chitose's harem. I don't enjoy when anime of this archetype have secondary school characters consistently resolve life-altering issues with no connection to that character and magically have the best response to the situation, or they don't face ramifications from involving themselves in said issue. Hyoka is a great example of a cast finding themselves in scenarios where the MC uses that high IQ to resolve low stakes problems that are more whimsical and humorous. Shoshiman, on the other hand, says not only does butting into life-altering events make others not like you, but there might be physical consequences to ruining someone's life. Good animation doesn't make up for average storytelling. I'll be placing Chitose is in the Ramune bottle in C tier. This will be the last anime to place on the tier list. Ranma 1/2 Season 2 brought more of Ranma and Akane's entertaining dynamic back, and the comedic chaos that follows. This season was more enjoyable to me by the fights not being defined by which club they're going into battle with. I've continued to maintain my respect for a manga from 1987 that is able to use genres, themes, and tropes that have become common in the modern day that I don't commonly like outside of this anime particularly. When limited exposure I have to ecchi, it would seem the genre has shifted away from its use as a comedic tool into primarily its use as a fan service. That shift was much more apparent with Ranma, where you have scenes that had the same opportunities a modern anime would, but make the decision to use it for humor instead. This was a solid B for me. From the tier list, it's pretty apparent what I found to be the best anime of fall 2025, but I'll put it into words. Spy Family Season 3 was the best anime of fall. Lloyd's backstory and Anya's time on the school bus were profoundly moving, with nothing else in the season coming close. Whether it was making you laugh, being brought to tears, or wanting to see Anya protected from how harsh the world can be, Spy Family was an anime you couldn't skip or look away from, and the only redeeming part of fall 2025. On the other hand, the worst anime of fall 2025 isn't so apparent. I've discussed negatively so many things from this season, and for good reason. At this point, I've watched seasonally for almost a decade, and 2025 is one of, if not the worst falls I've ever experienced. Does some of that have to do with summer 2025 being one of the best seasons ever? Definitely, but that's not an excuse for fall to phone it in with all of this trash. The battle for the worst anime of fall comes down to two titles, One Punch Man Season 3 and Kakuriyo Bed and Breakfast for Spirit Season 2. Now this might come as an upset for some. In spite of that, I'm giving it to Kakuriyo. I had a lot more excitement for the sequel, and there wasn't a prequel like with One Punch Man to create doubt about the series. Somehow the animation was even worse than One Punch Man as well. That's not a good thing, but it's kind of impressive. The final factor ends up being I will never watch Kakuriyo again. The second half of One Punch Man Season 3, I might. That's it for the fall 2025 tier list. Those are my thoughts and opinions for everything that I watched. Writing this script was just as miserable as watching some of the anime, since I had to think about them and what they did wrong. So with that, I'll rinse my hands of it and focus on better things like winter 2026. Let me know your thoughts on the tier list, what you agreed with or don't, and leave a like to support the video or a dislike if it's trash, and subscribe.